You can be seated. We'll be back in Revelation chapter 1. We're going to finish chapter 1 this morning, and we're going to finish chapter 2 and chapter 3 all this morning. So I hope you packed the lunch and maybe dinner. We're going to be here just for a little while. On the screen now, the scripture I'm going to use is, again, that's that big chunk taking us through chapter 3. Then I'm going to use Daniel 7 as well. Just throughout this series, Daniel 7 is going to come up a lot. So I would bookmark that, make some way to remind yourself to continue. We're going to go back to Daniel 7 a good bit. So we're going to cover these 7 churches this morning, and we're going to do a flyover this morning of them. I'll hit them briefly. In November and December, at the end of the series, we're going to come back around to these 7 churches because I think what's going to happen is we're going to see, I'm praying, we're going to see something in Revelation that we hadn't seen before. And then it's finally going to make sense why these 7 churches needed this letter. I think that's what's going to happen for us. That's my prayer. And then we're going to be able to see us in the 7 churches and then why we needed this letter to those churches as well. So this past week, I had the honor and privilege of going to camp with our middle schoolers and high schoolers. It was fun. Last minute, so I got a camp shirt. I had to buy mine, so it's whatever. But I did. And so Meredith and I did youth ministry for a number of years. Loved it, man. We just loved doing youth ministry. I miss it. It was a blast this past week to be part of that again, but it's kind of a late last-minute addition, which meant I had the honor of driving the girls' bus on the way up, which is fine because I grew up with 5 younger sisters. I coached girls' high school volleyball for 4 or 5 years, and so I drove buses with girls. I've done that a lot. I understand how it works. I understand everything. I understand every 30 minutes you got to stop for the bathroom. I get it. I understand. The difference is, back in my day, I can say that now, in my mid-40s, back when I was younger and doing student ministry, our students didn't have phones like they do now, right? So they did, but they had the Motorola Razr, and so you had to text every number 3 or 4 times, you had to write a letter, and no music on it. We still had the CD visor sleeves, remember, that we used to put in? So you were hoping the rental van had a CD player. That was the hope, man, because if not, we're just going to have to listen to AM radio for the ride. And so I am ready. In my mind, I know I'm driving the girls' bus that Monday morning at 8 o'clock. And so I am hyping myself up for what's going to happen, and that it's going to be loud and crazy. They're going to want to dance to everything. I brushed up on every Taylor Swift song that I knew. I wanted to be educated on what we were doing. I don't care about the direction as much as I care about I got to know what's happening inside the van. So we get in. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, Monday morning. By the time we get in the van, it's probably 9 o'clock. And we begin driving, and there's not a sound at all in the van. And I was very uncomfortable with what was happening because I was ready, man. I was ready for the best 3.5 hours of my life. I could not wait for it, and I was prepared. And they were so quiet, and I could not figure it out. And I look in the mirror, and I realize they're all on their phones. And not just on their phones, earbuds in, headphones on. They've all got their own music. They don't need a CD player. They don't even need the aux. They just have their own stuff going on. And I was like, what am I going to do for 3.5 hours? I didn't bring earbuds. What am I going to do? Just drive? So I did. I just drove. That's all I did. The way back was a completely different story. They spent a week together. They got to know each other. And I don't know that any of them had their earbuds in. We listened to music together, we sang, we danced, we drove on 2 wheels. It was a blast. It's so much fun on the way back. And so there was that subtle difference. But this past week, we've been working on getting a nursing mother's room ready because apparently you guys like to have babies. And so we've got 7 or 8 babies that we've had in the church in the past couple of months, so we need a way to have moms be able to nurse babies. And so what was the student ministry storage room is becoming, again, a nursing mother's room because we're back in that cycle. And so we're ready for all that. Meredith's been looking for gliders and how do we design all this. And she found a glider on Amazon. Remember the gliders where you'd rock your babies to sleep? Maybe it's just a rocking chair for you. She found one that has an arm that comes up over in front of your face for you to put your phone into so you can scroll social media, you can watch Netflix while you're nursing and rocking your baby. I don't know how that hits you, but it breaks my heart because my kids don't need that anymore. And there are times that I miss that feeling, right, of just holding them when they're babies, rocking them, hearing the sounds from their mouths and from other places while you're rocking them, and singing songs to them. There's just a sweetness. And I know, like, it's exhausting, the nights are long, man, but there's nothing like being present in that moment. And so here's what's happened for us culturally, is that we've gotten to such a place technologically where we can be physically present in one place, but completely somewhere else on the other side of the world at the same time. That I missed, like the ride home was like, this is what I remember from youth ministry. I remember this. Because at first I was like, is this gonna be all week? Like they're gonna be on their phones all week long like this? Like I don't wanna do that. But there's this feeling of like, hey, I don't want to be here, so I don't have to. And I can look like I'm here, but I can really be somewhere else, listening to whatever in my ears. I don't really want to be holding my baby, so I'm going to, but I'm also going to be watching The Real Housewives. Like that's what I'm going to do. And there's it's not just the younger generation as well. I had a friend who we're going to call FaceTime the other day, and he's like, oh, hey, listen, you can, but my in-laws are here. It's like, oh, I'll wait. They're like, no, they'll be on their phones the whole time. It's totally fine. I'm like, bro, are your in-laws like 16? How old are your in-laws? Oh, they're in their 60s. Oh, well, all right. Anybody else experience that with your parents? You're like, get off your phone, Dad. Like we're trying to. It's all of us, because there's something about the present that it's like we want to escape from. So we're going to see something here in Revelation chapter 1 into 2 and 3 that's going to bring all of that to the surface for us. And it's going to raise up for us the ways that we too live our lives with our earbuds in. We live our lives with the arm of the rocking chair, watching something else instead of paying attention to what's happening in our presence. Before we get there, let me go back through our rules. I'll do this probably the last time for a while. There's a few rules for us when we come to Revelation. First is that the main thing is the plain thing, and the plain thing is the main thing. When you study the book of Revelation, the way in which it's written, if you lose track of this, you're going to find yourself in all sorts of places you didn't mean to end up. So we got to remember that. Now, what's hard for us is the main plain thing often references the Old Testament, and we're not so adept at the Old Testament. We need some help to get there. It's still the main thing to the original hearers. And I say that to say this, to remember that Revelation is a letter. It's a letter. It's been written by John, or by Jesus through John, to 7 churches in Asia Minor, literal churches. It's been sent to circulate around these churches. And what that means is, because it's written to a specific group of people at a specific time, in a specific place, for a specific reason, is that Revelation cannot mean to us what it did not mean to them. We don't get to interpret a letter based on our perspective. We have to put ourselves in their shoes. We have to read it the way they would have read it or heard it. So we don't get to lay our newspaper, our social media, our technology on top of this great revelation John has. We have to read it for what it is and understand why it mattered to that audience. You need to remember that Revelation is a prophecy. We read prophecy and we think future telling. Biblically, prophecy is more truth telling than future telling. So John sees himself in the line of biblical prophets, Old Testament prophets, who have a line they would say, it was just, thus says the Lord. The heart of Revelation is not look towards what's coming. Instead, it is, thus says the Lord. God speaks through his prophets to his people, and oftentimes what he speaks demands a response. And finally, Revelation is apocalyptic. And you hear apocalyptic and you think Brad Pitt and zombies. That's not what I'm saying. You think The Walking Dead. It's not it. Apocalyptic, the word, does not mean the end. The word means a revealing. It's apocalyptic. But this kind of literature, especially written by someone with the gift of prophecy, who is a seer, who sees behind the curtain. That's what apocalyptic means. They see behind the curtain. They're going to use a lot of imagery to help convey something to our imaginations, that we don't need more information. We need our imaginations revived. Information comes this side of the curtain. Imagination comes on that side of the curtain. And so Jesus, through John, is going to reveal what's happening even now in the heavenlies that we miss in the present. So let's go back here into Revelation chapter 1. And we'll continue our study. Here's verse 9 as we pick up from last week. I, John, your brother and partner in the tribulation. Don't read the tribulation and think what you've heard about a great tribulation. This is just a word. But the word tribulation actually has to do with pressure. It has to do with pressure from two sides, and you're caught in the middle of it. Anybody ride in a station wagon when you were younger with your siblings? Anybody on the hump? You rode the hump? Anybody? So those turns, remember your dad would turn, he turned way too fast, and you would get smushed between your siblings or between your aunt and uncle, whoever was in the back, and you'd get that. That's what tribulation is. It's that pressing in from two opposing forces. So John's saying, listen, I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm your partner. We've done this together in all the opposing forces that we've felt, speaking of the Roman Empire and following Jesus. And I'm your partner in the kingdom, that's of Jesus, and the patient endurance that we found in Jesus. And I was on the island called Patmos. John is on an island called Patmos where he's been sent by the Roman government for refusing to acknowledge the Caesar as Lord. He refuses to. And so he's exiled to Patmos. He's aged in his 80s, probably. We're going to stick with the majority of scholars who say this is written in 95 to 96 AD, and he writes a letter back to the mainland, back to the churches that he's seen and witnessed. He's pastored one of them. He's a bishop over all of them, and he writes this letter back. And I'm there on account of basically my testimony of Jesus. Verse 10, and I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. Now, you Baptists, you don't like that phrase, do you? In the Spirit? We're going to see some ribbon dancers soon. What's happening? We're handling snakes? This is about worship, right? I was captivated by the Spirit. I was carried along by the Spirit on the Lord's day. More on that later. And I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. I was in worship, and I heard what sounded like coming from behind me, a loud voice that sounded like a trumpet. He doesn't hear a trumpet. He hears a voice like a trumpet. He's not a valley girl in saying like all the time. He means like for what it means. It was like a trumpet. And I heard this voice with the power of a trumpet saying this, write what you see in a book and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus and to Smyrna and to Pergamum and to Thyatira and to Sardis and to Philadelphia and to Laodicea. The voice says, write all this down and then get it back to the mainland for these 7 churches that I know are on your heart. So let me show you a map of these 7 churches. It's going to help us make sense of a few things. So Patmos is down here on the left, that orangish color. That's the island of Patmos. It's a rock quarry. It's where the Roman Empire would send citizens who rebelled against Caesar, which they considered John to be. He's there. He's moving rocks from place to place, working at a rock quarry for the rest of his life. It's where he'll be. And he gets this vision. He hears the voice like a trumpet, and he sends this letter to 7 churches. And you can follow along if you want to in chapters 2 and 3. You're going to see the order. To Ephesus, and then Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. Do you see the path? All right, so he sends to 7 of them because that is literally how it would have been delivered. But pay attention. It's not 7 different letters. It's one letter. One letter. And the way they would send letters is you don't just send a postmaster who would drop it off in your mailbox. You take it in and read it quietly, and then if it's a bill, you put it on a counter to be paid later, only to never be paid later. That's not what's happening. They would send a letter, not with a mail carrier, but with a performer of the letter. It was to be read aloud. And so it's someone with bits of theatrics who knows what they're doing. And so this is sent now to these churches, and it's sent in a circuit, which means every church is hearing the same thing, which means by the time you get to Laodicea, Laodicea is not just hearing the bit that was written to them in Laodicea. They're hearing what Jesus said to Ephesus and to Smyrna and to Pergamum and to Thyatira and to Sardis and to they're hearing all of it. But this is the path. The boat would make its way from Patmos through the Isle into the port city of Ephesus. And then the reader of the letter would make his or her way up that path to Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and then down to Laodicea. That's the order. Now, these are literal 7 churches. They're not imaginary. They're not figurative. These are literal 7 churches. So then you're like, gosh, only 7 churches in all of Asia Minor? No. There's a lot of them. But Jesus chose 7 of them. And you got to remember, In Revelation and apocalyptic literature, numbers are not statistics, they are symbols. And 7 represents a divine completion. Think about a complete set. He caught them all. He's got all the Pokemon. That's what it is. It's the complete set of churches. And each of these 7 is distinct and unique in a particular way that we're going to learn about. So this first Ephesus, the first place he lands. We're going to talk more about this in November and December, but let me give you a flyover. Ephesus was a port city. It's first. It's the order of the route that this mail carrier performer would take. It's the 4th largest city in the Roman Empire, financially wealthy, ethnically diverse. It's a melting pot. People would come to Ephesus first to get on to Asia Minor. It's the way in. And so they would set up all sorts of idols, and all sorts of things are happening here in Ephesus. But at this point, it is the epicenter of the Christian faith. It started in Jerusalem, made its way to Antioch in the book of Acts, and then finally now to Ephesus. Remember in Acts chapter 19, Paul planted this church in Ephesus. And later he would hand that church over to Timothy, the young preacher boy. Timothy would be brutally murdered by the Roman Empire, and John, the Apostle John, the author of Revelation, would step in to lead the church in Ephesus. But to me, what's even more fascinating is the church at Ephesus was the church of Mary, the mother of Jesus. This was her church. So this church has some heavy hitters. Paul? Bro, Paul started your church? And then Timothy, and then the Apostle John, and Jesus' mom is there? Like, that's a significant church. That's an influential kind of church. It seems successful. And in their portion of the letter, they're blowing up a lot of programs and ministries. They're a church where the doors are always open. There's always things going on. It's always busy. They've been fighting false teaching, but they've lost their why. They have lost why they're doing it. So on the outside, they're doing all the right things. It's busy, but they've lost their love for Jesus. They're bustling, but they're loveless and lifeless. So the performer makes his way up to Smyrna. Smyrna is 2 of the 7 churches who don't get any criticism from Jesus, just praise. Smyrna is called the crown of Asia, the flower of Asia. It's beautiful. The author of the Odyssey and the Iliad, Homer was born here. This is Homer's hometown, not Simpson. That's a different hometown. Homer, who wrote these ancient works. But in Smyrna, they're feeling the pressure of persecution from Rome, but they refuse to give in. They fought against it. They fought against false teaching and this tribulation. Because they are faithful, the tribulation is increasing. The persecution is increasing there. He would make his way to Pergamum, which was once a faithful church who stood up against false teaching, but now has finally given into it, has cowered to false teaching from the outside and from the inside. This church was built on a high rock. Pergamum is it's like a cliff city, but it's known for its library of over 200,000 scrolls written on parchment paper. In fact, the word parchment paper, comes from the name Pergamum. It's known for its study. It's known for its library. It's the center of thought and ideas. It's actually the capital of the Roman province of Asia Minor. And the first temple to Caesar Augustus was built here in Pergamum. He would make his way down to Thyatira, where it's the center of worship for the god Apollo, who is the god of sunlight. And the citizens of Thyatira thought the emperor of Rome was Apollo in the flesh. Apollo was the son of Zeus. Then this man, emperor, who would be the son of Zeus, they would call him the Son of God. Prosperous for their manufacturing. It's the marketing hub of the Roman Empire. They're known for their trade guild. But to be in a trade guild, you had to give in to the worship of that trade guild's god. So Christians are fighting between wanting to have employment, but also not wanting to give in to this false worship. Jesus will reference Jezebel, who was an Old Testament worshiper of a false god named Baal. And she was teaching you could compromise. You could worship Baal and you could worship Yahweh. It's fine. You pick and choose. It's like Golden Corral. You get whatever you want. After that, you go get some soft serve. Then you get home and feel sick to your stomach. That's what it's like to worship these 2 gods. You can do it. It'll hurt a little bit later, but you can do it. Make his way down to Sardis. Sardis is a hypocritical church. They're known for their life on the outside, but they have no life on the inside. They're dead. They have great production, but there's no truth or heart. They're active. It's probably well attended. It's a wealthy church with no spiritual power whatsoever. He would make his way down to Philadelphia, which here in Atlanta, we aren't big fans of Philadelphia, mostly because of Bryce Harper, so we're not fans of that. But Philadelphia, it means brotherly love, from the Greek word philos or philo, which is a reciprocated brotherly kind of love. But they also have no criticism or complaint from Jesus. I'm not saying he's a Phillies fan. I'm just saying this place didn't get the criticism. But they're situated on the edge of volcanic activity. And so they would feel the tremors, they would hear the quaking, and at that moment they would leave town and they'd wait for the aftershocks to subside. They'd make their way back into Philadelphia, hoping their homes hadn't been ruined. But this whole town was known to live on the edge of fear. At any moment, everything could go bad. Now, they're being faithful, but they don't feel like they're home. They're not settled yet. Oh, and then we get to Laodicea, the one that many of us are probably most familiar with because of what Jesus says to them here. He talks about knocking at the door. This is where he calls the church at Laodicea lukewarm. I'd rather you be hot or cold, otherwise I'm going to spit you out of my mouth because you're so lukewarm. But the context is Laodicea is one of three sister cities, Colossae and Hierapolis. They're situated along the Lycus River. Laodicea kind of the farthest away, so they didn't have any natural water. They had the aqueduct system all the way down to Laodicea. So by the time water got from the Lycus River to Laodicea, any guesses as far as what temperature it was? Yeah, lukewarm. Really good for nothing at that point. But they needed water, so they dealt with it. On top of that, these sister cities, Hierapolis was famous for its hot springs that were used for healing and medicinal care. Any aches and pains and scrapes and bruises, you would go to the hot springs and you would find healing there. Colossae, the other sister city, was known for its cool, refreshing springs. You go to Hierapolis for healing from the hot water. You go to Colossae for its refreshing from its cool springs. And Laodicea, all they had was the lukewarm, good-for-nothing water. And Jesus says, hey, the church Laodicea is just like that. They're not refreshing. They're not healing. They're just kind of there. They're just there, which is good for them because the Roman Empire doesn't care. Like if you're just there, not causing any problems, that's fine. So they're doing fine. They're existing, but they're not making any impact for the kingdom. But Laodicea is the one church that Jesus has nothing good to say about. Nothing. But I mean, they're not giving into false teaching. They're not doing all that, but they're also not pursuing him. He's like, listen, this is terrible. It's terrible. So the question then is, well, how does Jesus begin this letter? It's supposed to be circulated among the 7 churches. They're all going to hear from everybody else. You've got 7 different churches. Some are good. Some have been compromised. Some are lifeless. Some are legalistic. Let's go back to chapter 12. John hears the voice, like chapter 1, verse 12. John hears the trumpet. Then verse 12, and I turned to see the voice, which sounds crazy, doesn't it? You don't see, maybe some of you do see voices. I don't know. We can talk about that later. You don't see voices. You see where it's coming from. John, the sound like a trumpet. So he physically turns his body to see the voice that was speaking to me. And on turning, I saw 7 golden lampstands. We're going to learn later in verse 20. These 7 golden lampstands, Jalen read it to us, represent the 7 churches. He hears a voice coming from the 7 lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstands, where? In the midst, in the middle of, among the lampstands. What do the lampstands represent? The churches. Among the churches, he sees the voice. And he sees one like a son of man, which is a very Jewish way of saying a human. I saw one who looks like the Son of Man, who has the voice like a trumpet, so much so that I had to turn to see it. And he looks like a human, a son of man, an offspring of man. Now, that's fine, right? Cursory reading, that's great, but you got to remember, there's over 500 allusions in Revelation to the Old Testament. This phrase, son of man, was Jesus' favorite way to refer to himself. In Matthew 26, he's on trial before his crucifixion. He said, tell us now, are you the Christ? Are you the Christ? And he says, you said it. He says, but from now on, you will only see the Son of Man on his throne and coming with the clouds. But that's a reference all the way back to Daniel chapter 7. So turn there, if you would, to Daniel 7. I'll put it on the screen here in a second. Let me give you some context. Daniel 7 is kind of like the prequel to Revelation. You have to watch Daniel 7 to understand Revelation. Does that make sense? Like, you're going to get some character development there. You're going to understand some of the arcs. You're going to understand what's happening. But also, if you watch Revelation and then you watch Daniel 7 again, you're like, oh, I see it now. And now I understand Daniel 7 more because I've seen the sequel in Revelation. So Daniel is a young man who is taken from Jewish land into captivity in Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar is there, and he demands that everybody bow down to worship a statue of him. Daniel and his boys, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, refuse to do it. And so they get thrown into the fiery furnace. Jesus meets them there. They come out. They're not burned at all. And the king's like, who is this God who saves you from my furnace? Pronounce the name of Jesus. A number of years pass. Nebuchadnezzar is no longer the king. There's a new king there. And in Daniel chapter 7, we get that Daniel is a man who has visions, who has dreams, who sees things. And he has this vision in Daniel 7 of 4 beasts. Each one is animal-like, has its own characteristics, but they've risen up out of the land. And there's 4 of them. And we'd learn later in Daniel 7, they represent the state. They represent human government institutions, particularly the ones that have sent the Jewish people into exile, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon. But there's a 4th one, and Daniel cannot figure out who this 4th beast is. The other 3 have kind of been put to the side. This 4th one is ravaging humanity. And in the vision, Daniel cannot figure out how to stop this beast. And so as that's going on, in Daniel 7, verse 9, he has another vision. He says, I looked, and I saw thrones being placed. Now, multiple thrones. We're going to say at least 2 thrones. They were being placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. The Ancient of Days is the phrase Daniel uses to reference Yahweh, or God the Father. He has a vision of thrones coming down, multiple, and he sees the Father, God, the Ancient of Days, sit on the one throne, the big throne. Now watch how he describes the Ancient of Days. His clothing was white as snow, the hair on his head pure wool, meaning white. Anybody else? Amen? His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. And thousands served him. But then 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. And the court all sat in judgment, and the books were open. So now we're like, oh, okay. It's a courtroom scene. And so the Ancient of Days has sat on his throne, yes, as king, but also as judge. And apparently the books, we don't know if they are, but there's books being opened, ledgers being opened, and there's 10,000 times 10,000 people waiting to see what the judge, the Ancient of Days, decrees. But I looked then, because of the sound of the great words, that the horn was speaking. We learned that the 4th beast has a horn that's declaring great and mighty things. And there's like, I heard it again, so I looked to see that, and I looked. And the 4th beast was finally killed. Its body destroyed, given over to be burned with fire. But then the other 3 beasts, well, their dominion, their reign, their rule was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Different sermon, we'll get to that. I saw in the night visions. So it's visions and over. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there became one, what? Like a son of man. First time that phrase is used. It's used in conjunction with someone coming on the clouds that looks like a human. Now, let me give you some backstory. All the way back in Genesis, God created the world as it should be. He creates a man and woman, and he wants them to rule the world with him. Name animals, care for the garden. The plan in Eden was the plan for the rest of creation. He's training them there. He wants to send them out to reign and rule, to partner with him, to have their own seat in dominion with God the Father, the Ancient of Days. Adam and Eve meet a serpent in the garden. Now, the root word for serpent is the same root word for beast and the same root word for dragon. It means a scaly creature. Genesis 3, they give in to the serpent beast, And so they no longer choose reigning and ruling with God. Now they've chosen reigning and ruling with the beast. God steps in, takes care of it, and says, listen, there's coming a day. I'm going to send you a hero. And he calls the hero in Genesis 3 the offspring of the woman. He's coming as a human. And he's going to be bitten in the heel by this serpent beast, but he's going to crush the head of the serpent beast. So now the hope from Genesis 3 is, who is this? Who is this? Who is this offspring of a woman? Who is this human that will come rescue all of humanity? You flip over one chapter and you meet the offspring of Adam and Eve, a young man by the name of Cain. And so if you're reading the story, like, oh, this is him. That was fast. He's here. We can't wait. Cain and Abel offer sacrifices to Yahweh, to God. God accepts Abel's offering and not Cain's, and Cain gets furious about it. And God tells Cain, listen, buddy, I know you're upset, so here's what's going to happen. Sin is crouching at your door like a beast. The beast wants to devour you. Be careful. Don't give in. But who we think is the hero, Cain, gives in to the beast yet again. He becomes bestial and kills Abel. So now we're left throughout the rest of the Old Testament looking for this human, this offspring of a woman, who would finally sit on the throne, who would reign and rule with God. Who's gonna fix all of this? So we meet Noah. Maybe it's Noah. He's faithful. He can use gopher wood. So that must be a pro for him. So maybe it's Noah. Noah rescues people 40 days and 40 nights. He finally lands. And then the next thing we see about Noah is that he's drunk and naked in a garden. She's like, nah, probably not him. Keep reading the character arc. We meet Moses. Is it Moses? We meet Abraham. Maybe it's Abraham. God likes him. Then he's like, hey, Sarah, my wife, listen, I want you to pretend to be my sister. Let's lie to get in. Also, God said we could have kids. You're not having them. Why don't I just sleep with your maidservant? Let's figure all that out. So Abraham's not the hero. Well, maybe it's Moses, right? Maybe it's Moses. Then Moses kills a man and runs into the, well, it's not Moses, so it can't be him. Well, maybe it's David. It's got to be David. He's a man after God's own heart. He's also after a woman's heart, so it's not him either. So now you're left. The point is you're left at the end of the narrative of like, golly, who is it? Who's going to sit on the throne? Who is the offspring of a woman who's going to crush the head of the scaly serpent beast? Who is it? Then they're in exile, like, oh, it's over, man. There's no one. We have no hope. And Daniel has this vision of a human, the offspring of woman, the son of man, who comes down with the clouds and who stands before the Ancient of Days, God the Father, waiting to be approved by him. And read what he says. He's presented to the Ancient of Days, and to him was given. He is approved of. This is my son, Matthew 3, in whom I am well pleased. Given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Daniel has a vision of a son of man coming down, approved by God the Father, the Ancient of Days, who takes his seat on the throne, vacated by humanity, who was supposed to be reigning and ruling with them. No one could do it. You know who can? The Son of Man can. The vision Daniel has. He's like, this is thousands of years before anything is about to happen. And he has this vision of Jesus. And now Revelation tells us, oh, yeah, that was definitely him. That was definitely him. If you had any question about whether or not it was the Messiah, it definitely was him. So then back to Revelation. In the midst of the lampstands, among the churches, we see him again. We see him clothed with a long robe with a golden sash around his chest. Now, who wears a long robe? Well, we learned this in Exodus. Priests do. Priests wear robes. Yeah, but who wears golden sashes? Well, kings wear golden sashes. Yo, what? He's a priest, but he's also a king? Uh-huh. But look where the sash is. It's around his chest. Like the pictures you see of Swedish Jesus walking on the beach. And there was one set of footprints because he carried you. That's what's happened. The sash, when the king or the priest was working, the sash would be worn like a belt to gird up his loins. I don't know why I did that when I said that, but that's fine. To gird up his loins. But when the priest or king was done, you want to know where their sash would go? Around their chest. When their work was done, they would wear it around their chest. So John sees the Son of Man, Jesus, dressed like a priest, but also a king, but a priest and a king who had finished their work. That's what he sees. Then he continues. The hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. Have you heard that before? Who did that describe in Daniel 7? Do you remember? The Ancient of Days. But hold on. Now it's describing the Son of Man. Okay, so he's a priest but a king, and he's also God? This vision John is seeing, that he's going to send to the churches who are under intense persecution is, hey man, among you is a priest who's also a king who actually is God in the flesh. And he's among you. But his eyes were like a flame of fire, which sounds again like the Ancient of Days. White robe like a priest, golden sash like a king, white hair, which denotes wisdom. He has experience, a gentle wisdom about him. This comes from the book of Proverbs. Eyes like a flame of fire throughout the Old Testament references judgment. He's a king, he's a priest, he's full of wisdom and grace and gentleness, and he's full of fire like judgment. Verse 15, but his feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace. Now, bronze denotes judgment throughout the whole of the Bible. Bronze is judgment. But here's where it gets really interesting. In Daniel chapter 2, Daniel has a vision of King Nebuchadnezzar. And the vision is this king has a golden head. He's a golden head. But his feet are made of clay mixed with iron, and they can't stand. And so when the hard times comes, when the tribulation comes, that king Nebuchadnezzar, who looks like he has it all together because he's full of gold, his foundation crumbles under the weight of trial and tribulation because it had not yet been refined in the fire. But wouldn't you know that Jesus' feet were made of bronze refined in a furnace? Nebuchadnezzar couldn't stand. You know who can stand? Jesus can stand. But then his voice like the roar of many waters. So think whitewater rafting. It's that loud sound of it's coming, impending doom is coming. Okay, so he's a priest and he's a king, and he's full of wisdom and gentleness and grace, but also full of fiery judgment. And he's steady, but also not steady like rushing water. Keep reading, verse 16. In his right hand he held 7 stars, which we learn later are the angels, the messengers of the 7 churches. And from his mouth came a sharp two-edged sword. Sharp two-edged sword has been used in the New Testament to describe the Bible, the Word of God, the Scriptures. And it's double-edged because it's meant to pierce through bone and marrow into the very heart and soul of a man. It's meant to discern between good and evil, to judge the man. Okay. Now his face was like the sun shining in full strength. So don't think you flew too close to the sun and you got burned. Think of a cold day, but it's 12:30 and it's a pure blue sky and the sun is out. What does that feel like? It's warm, isn't it? It's comforting, it's settling. That's what's being denoted here. He's a priest who's also a king. He's got wisdom and gentleness and also the fiery eyes of judgment. He's steady with feet of burnished bronze, but he's rushing like many waters. He has discernment and judgment coming from his mouth, but his face makes you feel like he loves you. It feels really warm when he looks at you. Isn't that crazy? That's the vision he has. So his response, verse 17, is, I just fell at his feet as though dead. I'm like, oh my word. Fiery judgment? Double-edged sword in his mouth? I'm dead, man. I'm dead. But we read that he lays his right hand, the hand of honor, on me and says, well, fear not. Don't be afraid, John. Because I'm the first and the last. I'm the living one. You were there. Remember, I died. And then I now am alive forevermore. And listen, it's better. Now I hold the keys to death and Hades. You don't need to be afraid of me anymore. I've conquered the very thing that could end you. You no longer have to fear it. I've taken care of it. I took care of death and the grave. So yes, the sword and the fire, yes, all of that. But it's not for you, buddy. Stand up. Stand up. I conquered all of that. Instead, he says in verse 19, then you write these things down. I want you to write it down. Write what you have seen. Write what you're seeing. And write what you're going to see, the things that are going to take place after this. Well, then the question is, well, then what did he just see? What is he supposed to write down of what he just saw? We'll go back to verse 12. I saw the voice. I saw the voice of the one speaking to me. And then I turned and I saw the churches. But in the churches, I saw one like the Son of Man. What do the lampstands represent? The churches. And then where is Jesus? In the middle of them. You're like, yeah. I mean, he'd be in the middle like Smyrna and Philadelphia. They were the good ones. Maybe he's closer to that side of the map. No. In the middle. You mean like with Laodicea too? Uh-huh. And Ephesus? Totally. Thyatira? Uh-huh. He's with all of them? Totally. Okay. Priest and king, gentle wisdom, fiery eyes, bronze steadiness, rushing waters, double-edged sword, warm noonday sun. Uh-huh. That's Jesus? Yeah. So these churches, under Roman persecution, 2 were doing fine, 5 were really struggling. Some gave in to false teaching, some were going through the motions, some were legalistic, some were lukewarm, and Jesus is there with all of them. All of them. Among them, in their midst, in the middle of them, which has to be hard, doesn't it? Because for Philadelphia and for Smyrna, who are doing the right things, but the more things they do right, the more they're persecuted, the question is, bro, are you sure he's with us? Because it feels like when we're obedient, things get worse for us. And John's like, I don't know, man, I saw this vision. I saw it. And then the other ones are like, there's no way he's with us, man. We've screwed this whole thing up. There's no way he's with us. And John's like, no, I saw the vision. He's there. And he begins, Jesus, to each of the 7 churches with this phrase, I know your works. How do you think they felt when they heard that? What if Jesus was here right now and he's in a classroom and calls us in one by one? He's like, hey, sit down. I know what you've been doing. How do you feel about that? You like that feeling? Like when your dad comes home from work and your mom told him what you've been doing all day? And he's like, hey, come here. Listen, your mom told me what you've been up to. Now, if you've been like doing dishes, you're like, awesome. But if you've been beating up your sister, it's like, maybe not so awesome. So these churches are like, oh, he knows our works. What do you mean he knows our works? Does that make you want to fall down as though you were dead? It does, doesn't it? Because when you see him, you don't see the white wool hair, you see the fiery eyes of judgment. When you see him, you don't see the bronze steadiness of his feet, you hear the mighty rushing waters. When you see him, you see the sword out of his mouth, you don't feel the warmth of the noonday sun. And yet, he's both of them. And what shakes us is what we're doing when he's among us. That's what changes things for us. Remember when you were growing up and your parents left you home alone? And then you heard the garage door open or you heard their car coming down the street? Depending on what you were doing, changed how you felt about that moment? And now you got more warning because you got Life 360, so you know when your parents are getting closer. Turn it off, right? But if you're mopping, you're like, hey, come on in, so glad you're here. It changes, right? What you're doing changes your perspective on him being with us. So I went to camp this past week. You know who else went to camp? My 15-year-old. How do you think he felt when he heard his dad was coming to camp with him? He was excited. He couldn't wait. He loved it. I'll answer the question for you. But what the 7 churches needed, whether you're in Philadelphia and Smyrna or you're Laodicea and Thyatira, you need to know Jesus is among you. You need to know he's with you. That's what they needed. Then it gets even more interesting because he would begin each of these statements with, these are the words of him. Some of your translations say, these things says he. It's the Greek phrase, tadai, which is fine, because you knew that. You already knew that, so it's not that revolutionary for me to tell you that. What you don't know is that that's actually not even a religious phrase at all. That's a political phrase, taken right from the Roman Empire. Because when the Roman Empire would send edicts from Caesar or from the emperor into Greek-speaking provinces, the page would stand up and say, "Tada lege," the words of him. And he would say, "Caesar Augustus, Emperor Domitian." The words of the emperor is what he would say. And he would give an edict. He would declare something to those provinces. So what Jesus is saying is, I'm a better emperor than that. Listen to what I say. Listen to what I'm declaring, the edict that I'm giving you. It gets even better. Remember back in Revelation 1, verse 10, he says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. Now, there's multiple ways to translate the Lord's day. Some would say, well, it must mean Sunday, because that's the Lord's day, the day of resurrection. Some would say, no, it's Saturday, that's the Lord's day, that's Sabbath from the Old Testament. Some would say, no, it means the day of the Lord, the day that he's coming. All those are fine. I'm going to tell you where I'm landing at this moment, which could change, where I'm landing right now. At this time, Domitian is the emperor, and he has enacted on the first day of every month a law, an edict, in which you'd have to come to celebrate him. You'd come to his temple, you'd put a pinch of incense on the altar and declare Caesar is Lord, Domitian as the master. You know what that day was called? The Lord's Day. The emperor's day. So what if John has a vision on the day of the emperor about the day of the best emperor? And the words are, Tadai lege, I got you. You don't even have this day. This day is mine. The words of him, the king. So who is speaking to the seven churches in the midst of Roman occupation and persecution? The true emperor. The one who holds the 7 stars in his hand. But where is he? Like, is the edict coming from the capital? Is it coming from some far-off kingdom? No, he's among them. Not miles away, he's with them. Well, how close is he? I mean, he knows them. He knows what they've been doing. He's been among them. But even closer than that, look at Revelation chapter 3, verse 20. How close is he? Behold, I'm close enough to knock on your door. He's among them. Close enough, I stand at the door and knock. And if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in to him, and I'll eat with him, and he will eat with me. So if you think back again to that van ride on the way up to camp, it's completely quiet because we're all with each other, but no one wants to be with each other. Right? Like, they're there, but they're not actually there. It's the phones, it's the earbuds. I mean, even in some sessions, you're like, hey, take your earbuds out. Can I just do one? No, you can do 0 of them. Or you can have 0 ears. It's up to you. You can go either way with this. Because the problem is you cannot listen to 2 things at once. Have you ever tried? You can't do it. You cannot do it. But the reason we don't hear the knocking on the door is because we've got our earbuds in towards something else. You're like, oh, I'm in such persecution. I feel like the more I do well, the worse things get. So you're like, man, forget it. So you put in your earbud, you put on a podcast, you pay attention too much to the local news, you start fixating on what's happening in your community. And so you get so distracted by that, you start pursuing things with your job. I'm going to make this go away by ramping up the volume in my earbud. How's that going for you? You feel more at peace? Are you more confident now that the Son of Man is on the throne? I would argue you probably don't. And you're like, well, where is he? Where's the Son of Man? You said he's among us. Where is he among the churches? Because I'm struggling, I'm suffering. Where is he? And there's this faint. But you don't hear it, do you? What if the issue is that you don't hear, but you actually don't want to hear it? Because before verse 20 in chapter 3 comes verse 19. And that was free theology for you. 19 before 20. Here's Revelation 3:19. Those whom I love, I reprove and discipline. So be zealous and repent. You want to know why you don't answer the door? You don't want to answer the door. Because he's not coming in to just sit with you and have dinner. Yeah, he wants to eat with you and you with him, and he wants to tell you, listen, you got to stop. You want to know why you're not feeling peace? It's not because I'm not with you. It's because you got your headphones on. And we don't want to hear that. No, I thought you were bringing the salsa. Just come in and we'll eat and not talk. Can we just talk about the Braves or something? No, we're going to talk about you. So there's two options. Either we don't hear the knock on the door because we've got it blasted in our headphones, or we hear the knock on the door and we don't want to answer because we know what he's going to say to us. So then here's the problem. You don't get to blame God. Well, you're so far away. Bro, I've been knocking on the door. I'm among you. Well, where were you? Knocking on the door? Literally knocking on the door of your heart, trying to get you to let me in. But you didn't want to let him in because you don't want to hear what he has to say. So how, things good? Has that gone well for you? So you come to church like, hey, let's have a meal together. Listen, but don't do 319 on me. Do 320 with me. Let's do that instead. That's not how it works, man. Like if you want him, if you want the emperor, today lege, then we turn to hear the voice. You get it? We turn to hear. You don't get to hear it and keep walking and then think you're going to end up where you need to be. You turn to hear the voice. So I don't know where you find yourself today. I don't know what you're playing in your earbuds today. But I know it's not just a high school problem. Where's Jesus? Oh, he's among the churches. Not mine, man. Like, my heart is so distorted, and I'm given into so much temptation. He's among you. You can't be among mine because I just feel like there's so much suffering. He's among you. Well, how do I know? Do you hear the knock? Let him in. Let him in. He might eat with you. Or don't. To which Jesus says, well, then I'm going to remove your lampstand. I'm going to take that away from you. Those are your options. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes? I want just to sit and to think and evaluate what we're listening to today. Because the presence of God is promised to us. The presence of Jesus is in our midst. It's among us. That's not up for debate. What's up for debate is whether or not you hear him or you're listening to him. And so students, you just came back from a week at camp. You back on the game already? You back texting that girl or that guy? Because he came in and ate with you for a week. And now it's 3:19 time. About the rest of us, things that we're chasing and pursuing. Yeah, I know what happened with the Olympics. You need a sermon for me to tell you how awful that was? But don't be so distracted by that you miss the voice of your Father, the Son of Man on his throne. He's got bronze feet, man. We're going to be okay. Maybe we need to turn down the volume or take out the earbud that we might actually hear from him this morning. And maybe he's going to say some stuff we don't want to hear him say, and so that's why we turn it up. That's why the white noise gets louder. It's why the music gets louder, the podcasts get louder, the Netflix gets louder, the relationships get louder. But that God, that Son of Man you're afraid of with the fire and the rushing water and the sword is also full of gentle wisdom and warmth and tenderness and steadiness. And the sword and the fire and the water are meant to bring you into that. So fear not. I'm with you. I'm among you. Don't be afraid. I've defeated anything that's going to destroy you. You can trust me. So God, today we come to you. Many of us, I know we're desperate to hear your voice, and we're quick to assume you're far from us, but you're telling us in Revelation chapter 3, no, you're not. And you've told us over and over again, you'll never leave us or forsake us. You're not far from any of us. You've told us over and over again, but maybe we need to see it here. Maybe our imaginations need to be revived again to know that you are in our midst, you're among us. That we aren't disqualified from your presence yet. Or the circumstances aren't meant to communicate that you're not here, but in fact that you are. So would you give us courage to take the earbuds out? Courage to take off the headphones? Courage to turn it down? That we might hear you, your still small voice, the gentle whisper of, fear not. I'm the first and the last, the living one. I died, but I'm alive forevermore. And I've got the keys to death and the grave. So may we stand up in confidence of that today. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.